Dawn breaks over the Yorkshire moors, gold and lavender streaks stretching across the sky as a cool mist hugs the rolling fields. In that soft, secret light, a group of Dartmoor ponies trots quietly down a winding path, hooves muffled against the dew-soaked earth. At their head moves a slim, graceful girl of 10, her unruly brown hair tucked under a faded riding cap, boots splashed with mud and eyes bright as the morning itself. Sophie Carter doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone, the way she moves, every gesture calm and confident, holds the ponies in perfect harmony. She lifts a hand, and Storm, the big gray gelding, pauses mid-step as if the world itself has hit pause. Bramble, Willow, Tansy, and the rest fall into line behind her, heads bobbing, tails flicking in the cold air. On a rise overlooking the lane, a tourist in a bright yellow raincoat stops in her tracks. She watches, spellbound, as Sophie seems to lead her small herd right through the fog, almost as if she's part of it. The woman's phone is out in seconds, the lens trembling as she captures the scene. The little video, mist swirling, ponies snorting, the girl barely glancing at the camera, will later explode across social media, with captions like, "The Pony Whisperer of Yorkshire," and "Is this real-life magic?" People everywhere, from Texas to Tokyo, will double-tap, comment, and tag their friends. They see a wild, beautiful moment, a slice of something pure in a noisy world. But for Sophie, it's just morning chores. She turns off the path and heads for Green Meadow Farm, a patchwork of mossy fields, sagging stone walls, and ancient oaks that have stood longer than the village itself. The farmhouse sits in the dip between two hills, smoke curling from its red brick chimney. Inside, the kitchen smells of strong tea and frying bacon. Arthur Carter, her grandfather, stands at the stove, back ramrod straight even though his hands tremble a bit these days. Margaret, her grandmother, lays out plates, humming along to a scratchy folk tune on the radio. Sophie slips in, boots leaving muddy prints across the tiles, and drops her riding cap on the peg by the door. She doesn't say a word, but Margaret smiles and gives her a quick, warm hug anyway. "You've got a touch of the wild in you, love," she says quietly, tucking a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. Arthur just grunts approval and gestures toward the kettle. There's a ritual to these mornings. Ponies fed and watered, eggs gathered, then everyone sits for breakfast together, watching the sun melt away the mist outside the window. No one talks much about the past. Sophie's parents, William and Elizabeth Carter, are never mentioned at breakfast. There's a heaviness behind Sophie's silence, a story everyone in the village thinks they know, but no one really speaks of. Instead, life spins on. Schoolwork at the little desk by the range, helping Margaret with baking, chasing after the chickens that always seem to escape just when you need them least. But that morning, as Sophie brushes Bramble's tangled mane, a voice calls from the lane. "Oi, Sophie!" It's Callum, the baker's son, waving a phone in the air. "You're famous. Look, my mum says you're all over the internet." He scrolls through the comments, reading them out loud, laughter bubbling up. Sophie glances at the screen, sees herself reflected in 100 tiny videos, and feels a strange, hollow twist in her stomach. Arthur comes out, face stern. "Let the girl be, Callum. She's got work to do." Callum shrugs, but as he turns away, a few other kids, some shy, some bold, gather at the gate, phones in hand. "Show us the ponies, Sophie," one girl calls. "Can you really talk to them?" Sophie just tightens her grip on the brush and keeps her head down. By midday, tourists are slowing their cars along the lane, peering over the stone walls. Margaret sighs, pressing her hands into the flour on the kitchen counter. "It's starting again," she murmurs to Arthur. "People poking around, asking questions, just like after the accident." Arthur's face hardens, a shadow passing over his eyes. "Let them look. Sophie's strong, stronger than they know." In the village, the mood isn't all cheerful. At the pub, regulars gather around the battered wooden bar, voices rising over the clink of glasses. "Did you see that video?" someone asks. "That Carter girl's got a gift, she does." But another shakes his head, muttering, "Ponies on public paths? What if someone gets hurt?" The debate gets louder, opinions dividing the room. A few call Sophie a blessing, a rare spirit keeping old traditions alive. Others grumble that the village was quieter before all this fuss. That afternoon, Sophie leads Storm and Willow along the edge of the moor. An elderly tourist stumbles on the uneven ground, and Willow, gentle as ever, nudges her upright, earning a grateful smile. But around the next bend, a small boy shrieks as Bramble's tail swishes too close to his stroller. His mother pulls him back, shooting Sophie a glare sharp enough to cut through stone. Sophie pauses, her breath coming quick, heart thudding like hooves on packed earth. As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the fields, Sophie sits alone in the barn, head resting against Storm's warm neck. She strokes his mane, thinking about the world watching, judging, loving, hating, all for a girl and her ponies. She doesn't cry. She hasn't cried in years, but there's a weight in her chest, heavy and silent as the dusk itself. That night, the local news flashes on the TV in the farmhouse kitchen. Arthur sits forward, scowling. "Green Meadow's gone viral," the presenter says, voice bright. "But not everyone's charmed. Trouble's brewing in the village." The camera pans to Helen Barnes, the sharp-eyed council member, lips pursed, arms crossed. She says nothing, yet. But Margaret shivers, reaching for Arthur's hand under the table. Sophie watches from the doorway, shadowed by the light. Outside, the ponies graze in the moonlight. She wonders what tomorrow will bring, as the mist creeps in and the village holds its breath. 2 years earlier, everything was different. The night the world turned upside down, a storm was rolling in from the west, thunder grumbling across the moors as wind rattled the hedges and rain lashed at the old stone walls. The Carters' small hatchback bumped along the narrow, twisting country road, wipers working furiously, headlights slicing through the sheets of rain. William Carter drove, jaw set and hands steady on the wheel. Elizabeth, in the passenger seat, hummed softly, keeping her voice light, trying to distract Sophie, who sat in the back seat clutching her favorite stuffed pony. They were headed home from a family dinner in the neighboring village, the air still thick with laughter and the lingering warmth of a Sunday roast. Sophie gazed out the window, mesmerized by the streaks of water racing each other down the glass, her eyelids growing heavy. In the front, her parents shared a quick smile, one of those tiny, wordless moments that fills a car with love. Then, out of nowhere, a flash of headlights, a car swerving into their lane, a blur of silver, a horn blaring. William jerked the wheel to the left, tires skidding on the slick tarmac. The world spun. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and Sophie was thrown against her seatbelt as the car pitched off the road into a ditch, crashing to a stop in the black, sodden grass. The rest came in flashes, sirens in the distance, blue lights swirling through the rain, hands, gentle but urgent, pulling Sophie from the wreckage. She saw her father, slumped motionless over the wheel, and her mother, her hair tangled with blood, face pale and still. Sophie opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. She stared, frozen, as someone draped a blanket around her shoulders, voices buzzing like bees in her ears. At the hospital, nurses and doctors came and went. Margaret and Arthur arrived, pale as ghosts, collapsing beside Sophie's bed in a tangle of tears and whispered prayers. Sophie didn't speak. Not then. Not when they told her parents were gone. Not even when Arthur tried to coax a single word from her lips. The trauma had stolen her voice. She retreated into silence, the only world that made any sense. The doctors called it selective mutism, but to Sophie, it felt like her voice had simply disappeared, lost somewhere in the wreckage on that rainy road. Back at Green Meadow Farm, the house was colder, quieter. Margaret tried to fill the empty rooms with the smell of baking bread and soft music, but it couldn't chase away the silence. Arthur kept busy outside, fixing fences, mending tools, but he'd come in at dusk, eyes rimmed red. Sophie hid in her room, drawing ponies over and over in her sketchbook, the paper smudged with eraser marks and sometimes tears. School was a nightmare. On her first day back, Sophie barely made it through the gates before her breath came short, and her hands shook so badly she dropped her backpack. The teachers were kind, but the other kids stared, whispering about the mute girl whose parents had died in a crash. After a week, Sophie stopped going altogether, refusing to leave her room, refusing to speak, even when Margaret begged her. Social workers came and went, but nothing changed, except that Sophie found herself more and more drawn to the pony paddock at the edge of the farm. It was there, one gray morning, that something shifted. Arthur had gone out to check the fences, hobbling across the field with his cane, when he spotted Sophie standing at the gate, eyes fixed on the Dartmoor ponies grazing beyond. Storm, the oldest and wisest of the herd, lifted his head and ambled over, snorting softly. Sophie reached out, trembling, and laid her palm against his warm, velvet nose. Storm didn't shy away. Instead, he pressed closer, breathing her in, his gentle patience melting a piece of the ice inside her. Day after day, Sophie spent hours in the paddock. She learned how to brush the tangles from Willow's mane, how to lead Bramble gently over the uneven ground, how to whisper her secrets into Storm's ear without making a sound. She still didn't speak, but her silence didn't matter here. The ponies understood. Margaret and Arthur watched from the kitchen window, hope glimmering faintly in their eyes. The first time Sophie led Storm and Willow out to graze on her own, Arthur wept openly, clutching Margaret's hand. "She's coming back to us bit by bit," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with tears. Slowly, life at Green Meadow Farm began to mend itself around Sophie's new routine. She took on more chores, feeding the ponies, cleaning their stalls, mending their bridles. Her world became small and safe, bounded by the paddock fence and the steady rhythm of hooves and heartbeats. The ponies became her refuge, her therapy, the only place she felt truly seen. But time marches on, and nothing stays hidden forever. One blustery spring afternoon, a neighbor's dog slipped its leash and chased Storm along the lane, spooking him badly. Sophie was there in a heartbeat, her quiet confidence calming the frantic pony before anyone got hurt. The neighbor, breathless and apologetic, marveled at the way Sophie seemed to understand the animals without a word. That story made its way around the village, growing with every telling, until even the most skeptical locals started to believe Sophie had a rare gift. Back in the present day, the video of Sophie and the ponies lights up every phone in the village. At her kitchen table, Helen Barnes, the sharp-faced councilwoman, watches it with narrowed eyes. She pauses, rewinds, and plays it again, her frown deepening. "This has to stop," she mutters, already drafting an email on her laptop. Her husband glances over the rim of his teacup. "What's wrong now, Helen?" She doesn't answer. Instead, she clicks send, launching the first volley in what will soon become a full-blown village war. Outside, Sophie stands at the paddock fence, unaware of the trouble brewing. She rests her cheek against Storm's shoulder, the wind tugging at her hair, the ponies shifting around her like silent guardians. For a brief, precious moment, everything feels safe. But across the village, gears are turning, and Sophie's world is about to change again. The morning after Sophie's video catches fire, Green Meadow Farm buzzes with energy, but the real storm is swirling through the village. At the bakery, the post office, and the pub, Sophie's name is on everyone's lips. In the bakery, old Mrs. Finch elbows her friend as she waits for her sourdough, phone screen shining with Sophie's image. "Would you look at that, Mags? Never seen ponies so well behaved, not since I was a girl." Margaret, on her weekly bread run, just smiles and nods, pride flickering behind her tired eyes. "She's always had a gentle touch," she says, but her voice holds a quiet worry. Down the street, a group of teenagers lingers outside the corner store, replaying Sophie's viral moment on TikTok. "She's famous now," one girl laughs. "You think she'll be on TV?" Her friend shrugs. "Maybe she'll get rich off YouTube. Imagine, pony merch." They giggle, but there's an edge of envy in their voices. The village has always been small, a place where everybody knows everybody, where secrets travel faster than the wind and opinions settle like dust. At the heart of the village sits the Fox and Hare, the old stone pub where every major decision and minor scandal is dissected over pints. By noon, the regulars are in full debate. Big John leans on the bar, pint in hand. "That Carter girl's a wonder, she is. Haven't seen anyone lead ponies like that since my dad's day." But at the end of the bar, Mr. Halliday, the retired postmaster, shakes his head, face twisted in a frown. "It's all well and good until one of those beasts tramples a tourist," he grumbles. "Too many outsiders here already, clogging up the lanes. Last week I couldn't get my car out for all the parked SUVs." The argument escalates, voices overlapping. "She's bringing business to the shops," someone shouts. "It's not safe. What if a pony bites a child?" counters another. "The Carters have always been odd, but they mind their own," someone else offers. "Still, those ponies ought to stay in the fields." A young mother at a corner table listens in, arms crossed tight, glancing anxiously at her toddler as if expecting a rogue pony to burst through the door. Meanwhile, at Green Meadow Farm, Arthur stands by the gate watching the traffic on the lane increase. Strangers slow down to snap photos, engines idling, voices carrying across the quiet fields. Margaret emerges from the kitchen, worry etched on her face. "Arthur, the phone's been ringing all morning. Reporters, council members, Helen Barnes called twice already." Arthur's jaw tightens. Let them call. They can't take the ponies from her. Not while I'm alive. But deep down, even he feels the old familiar dread curling in his chest. By late afternoon, Helen Barnes herself is making her rounds. She's dressed sharply, hair perfectly set, clipboard in hand as she marches up the high street. Helen has never liked chaos, never trusted anything she couldn't predict or control. Today, her lips are pressed thin, eyes sharp as she collects signatures for her latest crusade. Keep our paths safe. Ban ponies from public walkways. She approaches parents with strollers, elderly couples, even the local priest. "Did you see the footage of that little boy, startled by a pony last summer?" she asks, voice crisp. I shudder to think what could have happened if his mother hadn't been there. We need to think of safety first. Her petition gathers steam quickly. Some villagers, eager to please Helen, or at least avoid her glare, sign without much thought. Others hesitate, but Helen is persuasive, painting vivid pictures of stampedes, lawsuits, and chaos. It's nothing personal, of course, she assures Margaret when their paths cross at the grocer's. We all love Sophie, but we must be realistic. One accident, and Green Meadow Farm could be finished. Margaret forces a polite smile, but her hands tremble as she fills her basket. Bills are piling up at home, and the farm hasn't turned a real profit in years. The pony rides and therapy sessions were supposed to help, but if Helen succeeds, it could all disappear overnight. Word of the petition spreads, dividing the village cleanly in two. Supporters of Sophie and her ponies hang handmade "Save Our Ponies" posters on shop windows and telephone poles. Kids gather at the farm gates, eager to show support or just to be near someone suddenly famous. On the other hand, a chorus of complaints grows among the safety-first crowd. Too many tourists, too many muddy boots on the paths, too much attention for a girl who, in their eyes, should have moved on from tragedy. Evenings become tense at the farm. Arthur sits at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills Margaret tries to hide under the tea cozy. If this keeps up, we'll have to sell the back pasture, he mutters. Margaret shakes her head, eyes shining. Not yet, Arthur. Let's wait and see. The tension creeps into Sophie's life, too. She feels it in the way villagers look at her, some with kindness, others with suspicion. She hears it in the anxious whispers at the farm gate and the awkward silences at the corner store. Still, every day she rises before dawn, leads her ponies through the mist, and tries to pretend nothing is changing. In the quiet of the barn, she buries her face in Storm's mane, willing herself not to cry, but the storm outside keeps growing. One evening, as she brushes Willow's coat, Margaret appears at the stable door, face pale. They're nearly at 500 signatures, she says softly. Helen's called for a public meeting. The council's going to decide what happens next. Sophie freezes, her hands still on Willow's side, heart pounding so hard it aches. She glances out across the darkening fields and wonders, for the first time, if even her beloved ponies might be taken away. That night, as the village settles into uneasy sleep, a local journalist named Tom Hargreaves sits in his cramped office above the newsagents, scrolling through comments and tip-offs. Something about the pony debate catches his eye. A pattern, a detail, a thread he can't quite unravel yet. He scribbles notes, feeling the hairs on his arms rise with anticipation. There's more to this story, he senses. Much more. Outside, the mist returns, swallowing the village in silence, as everyone waits for the meeting that will decide the future of Sophie and her ponies. Morning light seeps quietly into Green Meadow Farm, but the air inside the old stone house is anything but calm. Sophie wakes early, just as she always does, moving in soft silence down the creaky staircase and through the narrow back hallway toward the paddock. She pulls on her boots, splattered and scuffed from 100 muddy mornings, and slips outside into the chilly dawn. The ponies greet her with soft wickers, Storm pressing his muzzle against her palm, Willow snuffling at her pockets for treats. The barn smells of hay and wood smoke and something solid, comforting, a small world untouched for a moment, by the worries waiting just beyond the gate. Sophie moves through her morning routine, each motion steady and practiced. She fills water buckets, hauls bales of hay from the feed room, then takes her time brushing Bramble's thick winter coat. It's the only time she truly relaxes, letting the rhythm of the brush and the soft, grateful sighs of the ponies fill the silence she carries inside. The world outside is changing, she knows that. She can see it in the way cars line the lane, hear it in the questions from strangers. What's it like to be famous? Can I take a selfie with Storm? But here, in the gentle shuffle of hooves and warm barn light, she can almost believe things will be okay. Inside the kitchen, Margaret tries to keep up appearances. She hums along with the radio, kneads dough for the day's bread, and sets out breakfast with a smile she hopes is convincing. But her eyes are shadowed by sleepless nights, and her hands pause a little too long when she thinks no one's watching. Arthur, never one for fuss, sits at the table with his newspaper and a cup of strong tea, wincing now and then as he massages his swollen knuckles. His arthritis is getting worse. Even simple chores leave him breathless. He hates that he can't help more. Hates the way age creeps up no matter how fiercely he tries to fight it. Margaret hides the latest bills beneath the tea cozy, but the numbers dance in her mind all day. Electricity, grain deliveries, repairs for the old tractor that coughs and sputters more each week. She glances at Sophie, small, silent, lost in the world of her ponies, and her heart aches. If the council bans the ponies from public paths, what then? The farm's finances are already stretched to breaking. The extra visitors and donations from the therapy program are what's keeping them afloat. Without them, Green Meadow Farm might not last another season. Word of Helen Barnes's petition grows louder with each passing day. By lunchtime, Margaret has heard from half the village, some voicing their support, others their concern, a few quietly warning her to prepare for the worst. The online petition is climbing fast. Signatures from neighbors, out-of-towners, even people who've never set foot near the moors, but have plenty to say about safety and order. Helen herself is relentless, appearing on local radio, giving interviews in the village square, waving printed articles about incidents elsewhere, runaway horses, frightened children, lawsuits, and chaos. It's nothing personal, she repeats, but her eyes are hard as flint. We must put the village first. Arthur grows restless, stomping out to the fields whenever the phone rings, grumbling about outsiders and meddlers, his hands balled into fists. At dinner, the mood is tense. Sophie sits quietly, pushing peas around her plate, while Arthur mutters about nonsense, and Margaret tries to keep the peace. We have to trust the village will see sense, she says, voice brittle, but even she sounds unconvinced. Sophie spends her afternoons with the ponies, seeking refuge from the storm gathering around her. She knows the villagers are talking. She sees their looks, hears their whispers as she passes the shops, feels the weight of their hopes and fears pressing in on all sides. Even the other children have grown wary, uncertain whether to cheer for Sophie or steer clear of the trouble she attracts. One day, she finds a note wedged into the paddock gate. We love you, Sophie. Don't let them take the ponies. Her throat tightens, and she traces the shaky handwriting with her finger, tucking the paper into her jacket for luck. In the evenings, Margaret tries to distract Sophie with stories from her own childhood, riding to school bareback, daring adventures in the fields. But the tension seeps in all the same. The phone rings again. A local journalist this time, Tom Hargreaves, asking for an interview. Margaret hesitates, then agrees to a quick chat. Hoping the right words might sway the village back to their side, Tom arrives with a battered notebook and quick, curious eyes. He listens intently as Margaret and Arthur describe the pony's impact on Sophie, how they drew her out of silence, how they helped her heal. He jots down quotes, asks pointed questions about the farm's struggles, the petition, Helen's campaign. It feels like something bigger than just ponies, he muses, voice low. Maybe it's about who gets to decide what's right for the village. As he leaves, he glances at Sophie, who lingers by the stable door, and offers a quiet smile. "Hang in there, kid," he says. "Stories like yours matter." As dusk falls, the council posts a notice on the village bulletin board and across social media. A public meeting will be held to debate the fate of Sophie's ponies. The announcement spreads fast. Texts, emails, phone calls, people stopping each other in the street. The air grows thick with speculation. Will the council side with Helen and her supporters? Or will they listen to the voices rallying behind Sophie? No one knows. The only certainty is that the farm's future, and perhaps Sophie's as well, hangs in the balance. That night, Sophie sits in the barn long after the others have gone to bed. Storm dozes beside her, Willow's gentle breathing filling the quiet. She curls up in the straw, clutching the note from the gate, her heart racing with worry and hope. Outside, the moor stretches into darkness, and somewhere in the village, Helen Barnes drafts her next speech, determined to win. The village waits, caught in the hush before the storm, each person wondering what will happen when the meeting begins, and whether Green Meadow Farm will survive to see another dawn. The day of the council meeting arrives, and the air in the village is electric with nerves and anticipation. Long before sunset, cars begin lining the street outside the old village hall, their headlights cutting through the dusk, engines idling as neighbors, shopkeepers, farmers, and families gather for what everyone knows will be more than just a simple vote. Arthur stands in the kitchen, knotting his scarf with stiff fingers, while Margaret nervously checks her purse for the third time, making sure she has Sophie's note, the one a child left at the paddock gate, for luck. Sophie stands by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, her hands twisted together. She hasn't said a word all morning, but her silence hums with tension. Inside the hall, the walls are strung with handwritten signs, "Save the ponies," and "Let Sophie lead," while children clutching homemade posters line the aisle. The smell of damp wool and nervous sweat fills the air as villagers jostle for seats, their voices rising and falling in anxious waves. At the front, Helen Barnes stands behind a folding table, her petition spread out for all to see. Neat columns of names stretching across the page. Her lips are pressed thin, eyes scanning the crowd for support. On the other side, Arthur stands with his back straight, jaw set, Margaret beside him, hands clasped tight. The council chair, a tired man named Mr. Pritchard, calls for quiet, banging his gavel on the table. "Thank you all for coming," he begins, voice hoarse with nerves. "Tonight, we'll hear arguments for and against restricting ponies from public footpaths. Please, let's keep it civil." Helen is first to speak. She stands tall, voice carrying easily through the hall, her words practiced and polished. "I want to make it clear. This is not about Sophie or the Carter family," she says, her gaze flickering to the front row, where Sophie sits beside Margaret, eyes wide and fearful. "This is about safety. Just last month, a child was startled by a pony near the churchyard. What if next time someone gets trampled? We can't wait for a tragedy before we act." She gestures to the petition. We have almost 500 signatures. The people have spoken. A murmur runs through the room. Some nod, others look away, guilt flickering across their faces. Arthur steps forward, voice rough with emotion. With all due respect, Helen, these ponies are not a menace. They're part of this village, part of our family. Sophie hasn't spoken a word since she lost her parents in that awful accident, until the ponies brought her back to us. They saved her, in ways doctors and therapists never could. And I believe they help others, too. He looks around the hall, meeting the eyes of neighbors, friends, even strangers who've come just to see what happens. We need them. Sophie needs them. There's a pause. Then a young mother rises, holding her child close. My daughter's been to the farm. She used to have night terrors, barely spoke to anyone. Now she smiles when she's with Willow. The ponies are gentle. They help. Her voice quivers, but she stands firm, and a few people clap softly. Helen isn't finished. She turns back to the council, anger flaring. It only takes one accident, one mistake. Are we willing to risk everything for sentiment? If you want to help the Carters, fine. Donate, volunteer, but don't put the whole village in danger. This is about responsibility. Arguments volley back and forth. Farmers defending the ponies' place in village tradition, others anxious about insurance and liability, shopkeepers reminding everyone how much business Sophie's fame has brought. The debate grows heated. Voices overlap. Tempers flare. Margaret glances at Sophie, whose hands tremble in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. For a moment, it seems no one will find common ground. Then Mr. Pritchard raises his hand. Enough! Before we vote, is there anyone else who'd like to speak? The room falls silent. All eyes turn to the front. Sophie rises to her feet, knees shaking so hard she grips the edge of her chair. She's silent at first, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. Then, slowly, almost as if the words are being pulled from deep inside, she begins to speak. Her voice is soft, but in the hush of the hall, it rings out like a bell. The ponies saved me, she says. Her words hang in the air, impossibly fragile and impossibly strong. After the accident, I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to live. Her voice wavers, but she presses on. One night during a storm, I fell into the river. The current was strong. I thought I'd disappear. But Storm, he came after me. He pulled me out. He saved my life. Tears fill her eyes. In the crowd, even the most skeptical villagers shift uncomfortably, some wiping their cheeks. They're not dangerous, Sophie continues, voice gaining strength. They're my family. And they help others too. Please don't take them away. She sinks back into her chair, trembling. The room is stunned into silence. For a long moment, no one moves. Then, slowly, applause begins. Soft at first, then growing louder as more and more people join in. Margaret reaches over, squeezing Sophie's hand, tears streaming down her face. But not everyone is moved. Helen stands rigid, her jaw tight, eyes glittering with something like anger or pain. She leans toward the council, voice clipped. You heard her. But sympathy doesn't prevent accidents. We need rules. The council calls for a vote. Tension is thick enough to taste. Before ballots are counted, Helen catches Mr. Pritchard's eye. If something goes wrong, it's on your head, she snaps. He only nods, heavy with the burden of the choice. As villagers file out into the cool night, some comfort Sophie, others shake their heads and mutter. The fate of the ponies hangs by a thread. But for the first time in 2 years, Sophie's voice echoes through the hearts of everyone in the hall, her courage cutting through the fear, her truth impossible to ignore. Yet as they walk home, Margaret glances over her shoulder. Helen's face is hard, unmoved, her mind clearly working. Trouble, Margaret thinks, is far from over. The village hall may have emptied, but the story is far from over. That night, as rain taps on the roof of Green Meadow Farm, Sophie sits awake in bed, the echo of her own voice running circles through her mind. Margaret and Arthur have both fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep, but Sophie can't shake the image of Helen's face. How cold her eyes seemed even as the rest of the room softened. She hugs her knees to her chest, the distant rumble of thunder making the glass tremble ever so slightly in the old farmhouse window. The ponies are calm out in the barn, but something in the air feels off, like a storm that refuses to break. Across the village, Tom Hargreaves leans back in his creaky office chair, his laptop open to a half-written article. He keeps replaying the council meeting in his mind. Sophie's trembling voice, the crowd's stunned silence, Helen Barnes's tightly clenched jaw. There's something there, he thinks, some missing piece. He flips through his notes, rereading the details of the crash that changed everything. A stormy night, a fatal accident. Sophie, the only survivor. Most villagers know the story, or at least think they do. But Tom, a reporter at heart, can't leave questions alone. Why has Helen Barnes pushed so hard against the Carters? What is it that makes her so relentless? He opens his browser, pulling up archived news reports from that terrible night 2 years ago. The police report is brief but telling. William and Elizabeth Carter killed instantly when their car was struck head-on by another vehicle, the other driver injured but alive. Tom's eyes scan the document, then pause on a name he's seen too often in village minutes and newsletters: Helen Barnes. It sends a jolt through him. He searches for more, digging into council records and local court listings. There it is, in black and white. Helen's statement to police, admitting she'd been distracted by her phone, sending a text about a late-night council vote just before the crash. Tom's breath catches. He scrolls further, finding buried details in the local tabloid, rumors of a cover-up, hush money, a swift insurance settlement paid to the Carters by Helen's policy. The pieces click into place. All this time, Helen has been waging war on Sophie's ponies, but the guilt she carries goes far deeper. Tom's heart pounds as he realizes the truth. Helen Barnes was the driver who orphaned Sophie. Tom knows what he has to do. He prints out the relevant documents and tucks them into his bag. His hands are shaking as he drafts a quick message to Mr. Pritchard, asking for a follow-up meeting with the council. Then, unable to sleep, he types through the night, crafting a story that will shake the village to its core. When the sun rises, Tom is waiting outside the council office, nerves buzzing like live wires under his skin. By midday, word spreads that there will be another public meeting. This time, the turnout is even bigger. Rumors ripple through the crowd. Some say Helen plans to resign, others whisper about legal trouble, but no one really knows. Arthur stands with Sophie and Margaret at the back of the hall, uncertainty etched in every line of his face. Sophie's heart thuds so loudly, she wonders if the whole village can hear. Helen sits at the council table trying to appear composed, but her hands twitch nervously in her lap. Mr. Pritchard opens the meeting with a tired sigh. "There are new facts we need to address," he announces, looking grim. "Tom Hargreaves has brought forward information the council believes everyone deserves to hear." Tom stands, clutching the papers. "I've reviewed the police records from the night of the crash that took William and Elizabeth Carter's lives. he begins, his voice steady. The file confirms something that hasn't been spoken of openly. Helen Barnes was the other driver. She was distracted, texting about council business when the accident happened. A gasp ripples through the hall. I believe it's only right that the truth comes out, not for revenge, but for justice. The decisions made here should be made with open eyes, not hidden guilt. Helen jolts upright, face drained of color. That's a lie? She bursts out, but her voice falters. The crowd murmurs, uncertainty and anger mixing like oil and water. I didn't mean... She chokes, tears springing to her eyes. I didn't see them. The room erupts in chaos. Some people shout, some comfort Sophie, who stands frozen beside Margaret. Arthur stares straight ahead, jaw clenched, barely breathing. Helen crumples back into her seat, shaking uncontrollably. Mr. Pritchard raises his hands, calling for calm. Please, let's keep order, he pleads. Tom doesn't back down. Helen, we all understand mistakes can be made, but the healing can only start with the truth. Sophie deserves honesty. This entire village does. Helen sobs, pressing her hands to her face, mascara streaking her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispers, voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. In the tense hush that follows, Margaret steps forward and places a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie's eyes meet Helen's across the crowded room, and for the first time she sees not an enemy, but a woman shattered by remorse. Mr. Pritchard takes the floor. Given what we've learned, the council will revisit our decision. This community must come together, not tear itself apart. As the crowd slowly disperses, whispers ripple like wind through tall grass. Some people are angry, others shocked into silence. Tom leaves the hall, feeling the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He wonders if any story is ever just black and white, or if in villages like theirs, the truth is always a little muddy, a little messy, and a little too real. Sophie lingers in the doorway as dusk falls, watching Helen weep in the empty hall. For the first time, she feels something stir, an understanding, a strange sort of peace. The ponies are waiting at home and the future is more uncertain than ever. But tonight, a secret has finally come into the light. The news moves through the village like a wave, shattering routines, overturning old alliances, silencing even the loudest critics. For days after Tom's revelation, the village hums with uncertainty, and no one knows quite what to say to Sophie or to Helen, or even to themselves. Arthur is quieter than usual. Margaret fusses endlessly with the tea towels, and Sophie finds herself drifting through each day, the barn and the paddock her only sanctuary from the stares and the pity. Storm, ever loyal, nudges her gently each time she pauses too long, as if urging her to keep moving forward. The ponies seem to sense the heaviness in the air, huddling closer to Sophie whenever she's near, their presence steady and grounding in the swirl of emotion. One gray afternoon, Helen Barnes appears at the farm gate. She's pale and drawn, her usual confidence nowhere in sight. She stands there for a long while, gripping the latch with white knuckles, as if trying to summon the courage to walk the final few yards up to the porch. Margaret notices first, wiping her hands on her apron before calling softly, "Arthur!" He glances outside and his face hardens, but before he can say anything, Sophie steps past them, heart pounding. She walks to the gate, every step slow and deliberate. The wind tugs at her hair, but she doesn't flinch. She stops just in front of Helen, looking up with eyes far older than her 10 years. Helen's voice breaks as soon as she tries to speak. "I owe you an apology, and more than that." Her words catch in her throat, and for a moment it looks like she might turn and run, but Sophie just waits, silent and patient as always. Helen presses on, voice trembling. I can't take back what happened. I've told myself for 2 years it was an accident, that it was work, that it was the storm's fault, or the road, or anything but me. Her shoulders shake as tears spill down her cheeks. But it was my fault. I was texting. I was careless. I ruined your life. And then I tried to hide from it by going after your ponies, thinking if I just made you disappear, maybe my guilt would go too. A few neighbors pause as they pass by on the lane, drawn by the strange tableau. Margaret stands behind the kitchen curtains, watching, Arthur tense in the doorway, but neither interferes. This moment belongs to Sophie and Helen alone. Sophie studies Helen for a long time, her own feelings swirling, pain, anger, confusion. For months she's pictured this moment, wondered what she'd say if she ever met the person who changed everything. She thinks of her parents, of long nights awake, of the silence that wrapped around her like armor. But she also thinks of the ponies, of the strength she found in their company, and the way her voice finally returned, soft but unstoppable. Sophie reaches out, resting her hand on Helen's. The gesture is small, but it breaks something inside them both. I forgive you, Sophie says quietly, her voice steady as stone. Helen sobs, shoulders racked, crumpling to her knees in the dust by the gate. Sophie kneels too, wrapping her arms awkwardly around the woman who, for so long, had seemed her enemy. It's not neat, not tidy. Grief never is. It's messy, raw, and real. Arthur comes outside wanting to protest, but Margaret stops him with a hand on his arm. Let her be, she whispers. This is hers to give. The other villagers, those who lingered in curiosity or judgment, are struck silent. Some cry openly, others turn away, uncertain what to do with their own tangled feelings. After what feels like forever, Helen stands. Her eyes are red, but her face is softer, the tension drained away. Thank you, she whispers, voice barely audible. Thank you, Sophie. I don't deserve it, but I'll try to earn it. News of what happened at the farm gate spreads as quickly as Tom's story. By evening, the entire village knows. Sophie forgave Helen. That night at the council meeting, the atmosphere is different. No more anger, no more posturing, just a kind of hushed respect. Mr. Pritchard clears his throat, glancing at Helen, then at Sophie. In light of recent events, he says, voice heavy with meaning, the council withdraws its support for the petition. There will be no ban on ponies using the public paths. The Carters and their ponies are part of our community, and that's how it should stay. A ripple of relief moves through the room, applause swelling as people stand, clapping for Sophie, for her family, for the ponies. Helen doesn't return to her seat. She stands at the back, silent, watching as Sophie's world rights itself, at least a little. Even the skeptics have nothing to say. Some wipe their eyes, others slip away quietly, changed in ways they can't quite name. Back at Green Meadow Farm, Margaret bakes bread for the first time in weeks, the smell filling every corner of the house. Arthur lets himself smile, a rare softness warming his usually stoic face. Sophie stands at the paddock fence, arms around Storm's thick neck, tears running down her cheeks. Not of grief this time, but of release. The ponies nuzzle her, and for the first time in what feels like forever, Sophie's laughter rings across the fields, clear and true. As dusk settles on the village, Helen lingers on the lane, looking back at the farmhouse one last time before heading home. There's a new heaviness to her step, but also a new purpose. The hurt isn't gone, but it's lighter, shared, transformed. For Sophie, for her family, and for the village itself, something fundamental has shifted. Forgiveness has broken the cycle of anger. In the barn, Storm and Willow and Bramble stamp and snort, their bodies warm and solid in the straw. Sophie breathes deeply, the ache in her chest finally giving way to hope. And in homes up and down the village, neighbors sit quietly, turning over what they've seen and heard. Some wonder if they could ever be as brave as Sophie, if, faced with heartbreak, they could choose forgiveness too. The weeks that follow are unlike any Sophie has ever known. News of the council's decision and the story of Sophie forgiving Helen spread well beyond the boundaries of the village. Local papers run headlines about the Pony Whisperer, but it's the story of courage and forgiveness that captures everyone's heart. People from nearby towns start showing up at Green Meadow Farm, some bringing children who struggle with their own invisible wounds. Anxiety, shyness, grief, things that rarely show on the surface. Others come just to see the ponies and maybe catch a glimpse of the quiet girl who somehow brought a divided village back together. Helen Barnes, transformed by her confession and Sophie's grace, is restless at first. She stays away for days, afraid her presence might reopen wounds. But Margaret surprises her one morning at the bakery. "Come by the farm," Margaret urges gently. "We could use your help." Helen hesitates, but something in Margaret's eyes, a stubborn warmth, makes it impossible to refuse. She returns to Green Meadow Farm carrying a bag of homemade scones, her apology unspoken but deeply felt. Helen and Sophie walk the paddock together for the first time, neither quite knowing what to say. It's Sophie who finally breaks the silence, offering Helen a sugar cube and nodding toward Willow, who noses at Helen's hand, eager and curious. "She likes you," Sophie says softly. Helen laughs, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. For the first time since the accident, she feels welcome. It's Helen who brings up the idea. "You know," she says, "ponies helped you heal, Sophie. Maybe you could teach other kids to trust themselves with them too." She proposes a small therapy program. Nothing formal, just an afternoon where kids who've been through tough times can come and meet the ponies, learn to brush them, walk with them, maybe even ride if they're ready. At first, Arthur is skeptical, worried about insurance, about the old barn holding up. But Margaret is all for it, and Sophie's eyes light up in a way no one has seen in months. They put out a simple flyer. "Feeling sad? Anxious? Struggling? Come meet Sophie's ponies." Within days, families start calling, some from the next town over, others from farther away. Word spreading by whispers and recommendation. The first session is small, a handful of children, most of them quiet and wary, clinging to their parents as they arrive. Sophie leads them to the paddock, introducing them to Storm, Willow, and Bramble, showing them how to stand still, breathe deeply, and let the ponies come to them. It doesn't happen all at once. Some kids refuse to even touch the ponies at first. Others burst into tears when Storm lowers his head. But Sophie is patient, remembering how the ponies taught her to be gentle with herself before she could be gentle with anyone else. Helen throws herself into the work, taking on paperwork, organizing snacks, even scrubbing the tack room until it shines. She calls in favors from old colleagues. One donates a stack of riding helmets. Another helps set up a crowdfunding campaign online. They're stunned by the response. Within a week, donations start rolling in. Some from people Sophie and Helen have never met. Others from villagers too shy to speak up in person, but eager to help behind the scenes. A local therapist volunteers her time, offering support and guidance for the families who show up with hope and fear in equal measure. The barn fills with laughter again, and not just Sophie's. Kids who haven't smiled in months start giggling as Bramble slobbers on their hands or as Willow nudges them gently out of their worries. Some parents stand back, eyes wet, watching as their children, who have struggled to find their place in the world, finally connect. With a gentle pony, with Sophie, sometimes with each other. Arthur shakes his head in disbelief as the fields fill with life and purpose, and Margaret can't help but bake more bread, determined that no child or parent leaves the farm hungry. As the weeks go by, the therapy sessions grow. School teachers call to ask if they can bring students. A counselor from the city visits and is so moved she writes about the farm in a national magazine. Sophie finds herself busier than she's ever been, brushing ponies, leading children through breathing exercises, even teaching a few kids how to braid Storm's mane. Helen, humbled but grateful, watches from the gate, often moved to tears by what she sees. Healing in action, children rediscovering joy, parents daring to hope. One afternoon, as a small group of kids files out of the barn, a little boy with wide eyes tugs at Sophie's sleeve. He hesitates, then blurts out, "The ponies make me brave, like you." Sophie kneels so she's eye level with him, her voice clear and calm. "They helped me be brave too," she says. "Sometimes being brave means letting someone or something help you." The boy grins, squeezes her hand, and races off to join his friends. That evening, as the sun sets behind the moors and the last visitors wave goodbye, Sophie stands quietly at the paddock fence, listening to the soft nickers and contented snorts of her ponies. For the first time, the farm feels truly safe again. Busy, yes, and sometimes chaotic, but alive with hope and possibility. Helen joins her, hands stuffed in her coat pockets, and together they watch Storm lead the herd into the dusk. "You saved this place," Helen says softly. Sophie shakes her head. "We all did." As the stars emerge above the fields, the future feels wide open. The ponies aren't just Sophie's secret anymore. They belong to everyone who needs them, everyone willing to believe that healing is possible, even in the darkest times. And Sophie, once silent and hidden, now stands at the center of it all, her voice strong, her heart wide open to whatever tomorrow brings. The summer rolls forward, the moors lush with wildflowers, and the village settles into a new rhythm, one shaped by the hope and healing born at Green Meadow Farm. Sophie wakes each morning before dawn, slipping out into the cool mist and listening to the low, contented sounds of her ponies grazing just beyond the old stone wall. Sometimes, before anyone else is up, she wanders into the fields alone, the grass wet beneath her boots, breathing in the wild, damp air that's always carried the scent of freedom and beginnings. As she walks, she thinks about everything that's changed, not just in her life, but in the village and beyond. It's strange, she realizes, how a single moment can ripple outward and change so many other lives. On the farm, the pony therapy sessions have become a staple of village life. It's not just children and their parents who come. Now teachers, counselors, even elderly folks from the care home visit to stroke Storm's neck and watch the sun rise over the heather. Local teenagers who once scrolled past Sophie's video on TikTok now volunteer to muck stalls or hand out hot chocolate. Sometimes they admit quietly that they wish they'd stood up for her sooner. One misty morning, Tom Hargreaves returns to the farm. He's not here for a scoop. His story has already run in every local paper and even made its way onto a national morning show, but for something quieter. He brings his notebook anyway, always scribbling, always observing. He finds Sophie by the paddock fence, braiding Willow's mane, and asks if she'd mind answering a few questions for an article he's working on. Not about the accident, he promises, but about what you think the village, and maybe the world, should learn from everything that's happened here. Sophie thinks for a long moment, her fingers weaving and unweaving strands of soft hair. I guess the first thing is that it doesn't take much to hurt someone, she finally says. Sometimes just a mistake or a bad choice or a few words in anger. She glances at Storm, who watches her with gentle, wise eyes. But it also doesn't take much to help someone either. Sometimes it's just showing up, or forgiving, or letting people try again. Tom scribbles this down, looking thoughtful. He asks what she wants adults to remember most. Sophie's voice grows even softer. That phones aren't worth it, not when you're driving. My whole life changed because someone was looking at a screen for a few seconds. Tom nods gravely, jotting down statistics. In 2022, over 300 people in the UK lost their lives in crashes where mobile phones were a factor. One text, one glance, a split second that can take everything away. Maybe if people hear my story, Sophie continues, they'll remember to put their phones away and pay attention to driving, to each other, to what's important. They walk together through the paddock, passing the sign that Helen made for the new therapy program. Tom brings up forgiveness. It's rare to see someone as young as you forgive something so big. Sophie shrugs, but her eyes are serious. Holding on to anger didn't bring my parents back. It just made me smaller inside. When I let it go, when I forgave Helen, it was like my world got bigger again. Tom writes quickly, including a note about research he's read. How forgiveness isn't just about being kind. It actually heals, lowers anxiety, improves health. It's hard, Sophie admits, but it's possible. And sometimes, it's the only way to move forward. He asks about the ponies. What makes them so special as healers? Sophie smiles for the first time in their conversation, glancing at the barn where Margaret is setting out buckets of grain and Arthur is giving instructions to a group of eager kids. Ponies don't judge, she says. They don't care if you're sad or scared or angry. They just want you to be gentle and honest. Being with them teaches you how to listen, not just to the ponies, but to yourself. Tom nods, recalling stories from parents and teachers, even NHS studies showing that equine therapy is as effective as many traditional approaches for trauma and anxiety. When you're brushing Storm or leading Willow, you forget about everything else. It's like breathing out all the bad stuff and breathing in something new. As Tom packs up his notebook, he asks if Sophie has any final advice for his readers. She pauses, thoughtful. No one gets through life without help, she says. It's okay to be hurt or lost or angry, but don't stay there. Let someone or something help you find your way back. And if you see someone else hurting, help them if you can. Even a pony can save a life if you let them. Tom leaves the farm that morning, the mist beginning to lift, the sun breaking through and setting the fields aglow. His article, published a week later, ends with a call to action. Put the phone down. Forgive. Heal together. Let's remember what really matters before it's too late. In the weeks that follow, the village feels different. Arguments fade. People wave at each other in the lanes. The pub regulars raise a glass to Sophie and the ponies, proud that their small corner of Yorkshire could teach something to the world. Children, once nervous and withdrawn, now run through the fields in borrowed boots, laughter ringing out against the stone walls. The ponies, ever patient, take it all in stride, their world expanding as the village's heart grows bigger. And through it all, Sophie keeps walking the moor in the early morning, her shadow long against the rising sun, knowing her story, her family's story, isn't just about loss, but about hope, forgiveness, and the courage to let the world in again. The early morning of Pony Heritage Day dawns bright and clear, the kind of Yorkshire summer day that feels almost like a reward after so much rain and heartache. The entire village wakes up humming with excitement, bunting strung between lampposts, flags fluttering on the breeze. Tables are set out along the high street, loaded with homemade scones, jams, and pots of strong tea. From the window of Green Meadow Farm, Sophie can see the entire scene coming together. Kids giggling as they help Margaret hang ribbons on the garden gate, Arthur giving last-minute advice to the local handyman about where to place the sign that reads, Pony Heritage Day. Everyone welcome. By mid-morning, the village green is crowded. Neighbors who've barely spoken in years find themselves shoulder to shoulder, pouring tea, chatting about ponies and children, and retelling the story of the little girl who led her herd through the mist. Helen stands by the therapy program's table, handing out flyers and answering questions from curious parents. There's a shy pride in her posture, her eyes never quite leaving Sophie, who moves quietly through the crowd, checking on the ponies and helping the youngest children get comfortable. Storm, Willow, and Bramble are the stars of the day. Their manes are braided with wildflowers, and children take turns leading them down a short parade route lined with cheering villagers. Even the most skeptical, those who once signed Helen's petition, clap and shout as Sophie and her ponies stride past. Local musicians play folk songs under the old oak, the sound of fiddles and laughter weaving through the warm air. Arthur, stubbornly refusing to sit down for long, gives an impromptu speech about tradition, hope, and how proud he is of Sophie. His words are met with laughter, tears, and a standing ovation that makes him blush and grumble. But he smiles afterward, knowing he's not alone and feeling grateful for the changes that have swept through the village. Margaret bakes enough bread and pies for an army and insists no one leaves hungry. Volunteers, young and old, help run pony rides, paint faces, and keep the tea flowing. Midway through the festivities, Mr. Pritchard, his tie askew and a jam stain on his shirt, steps up to the microphone. Folks, before the parade begins, I want to say something. There's not a person here who hasn't felt the weight of the last few years. Our losses, our arguments, and our healing. Sophie, you reminded us what matters most. You brought us together, not just with your courage, but with your kindness. Today is for you, for your family, and for every child who finds hope in a pony's gentle eyes. Sophie stands near the paddock, cheeks pink with embarrassment, but smiling wide as the crowd erupts in applause. Children cluster around her, asking endless questions about Storm's favorite treat, if Willow ever gets scared, or if Bramble likes to jump. Sophie answers each one, her voice clear and warm, and sometimes she laughs so hard she almost forgets how heavy her heart once felt. Helen is everywhere, refilling lemonade, comforting a nervous child, explaining how the therapy program works, and thanking the donors who helped save the farm. She's changed, people whisper to each other. Not just sorry, but truly transformed by what forgiveness has allowed her to become. At one point, she kneels to help a little girl adjust her helmet before a pony ride, and the child wraps her arms around Helen's neck. "Thank you for the ponies," the girl says, and Helen nearly cries. But instead she laughs and hugs the child back. As the afternoon stretches on, the parade begins. Sophie leads Storm at the front, her head held high, a flower crown resting just above her eyes. Children follow with Willow and Bramble, waving to parents and grandparents, the whole village cheering as they pass. It's more than a celebration. It's a healing. The wounds of the past aren't erased, but they're woven into the tapestry of this new story, one made stronger by every person willing to reach out, let go, and start again. The rest of the day is a blur of games, stories, and music. Neighbors share old photos of their own childhood ponies. Parents exchange numbers to arrange future playdates, and kids invent wild tales about magic horses in the hills. Tom Hargreaves snaps photos for another feature, this time not about tragedy, but about hope, renewal, and community. He catches Sophie as she laughs with a group of kids, her arms thrown wide, her ponytail flying in the wind. "You've come a long way, Sophie," he says, and she nods, grateful. As evening falls, golden sunlight slanting across the moors. The village green is lit by strings of fairy lights. The ponies graze peacefully at the edge of the crowd, occasionally nuzzling a small hand or accepting an extra apple. The laughter grows softer, voices turning to stories and memories, people lingering in the glow of a day that feels like the beginning of something bigger than themselves. When the last crumb of cake is gone and the youngest children are drowsy in their parents' arms, Mr. Pritchard calls for quiet. He hands Sophie the microphone, and for a moment the crowd holds its breath. Sophie smiles, brushing hair from her face. "The ponies gave me my voice back," she says, her words steady and clear. "They helped me find hope again, and they helped all of us remember what it means to be a family, no matter what we've lost or how far we fall. Thank you for believing in us." The crowd erupts in applause, and as Sophie looks out over the village, at Margaret, Arthur, Helen, Tom, and every friend and stranger who came, she knows that her story, and the story of the ponies, is far from over. As night settles on the moors, the celebration lingers in the air, a promise that kindness and forgiveness, once sown, will blossom for generations. And in the barn, as she settles Storm, Willow, and Bramble for the night, Sophie whispers, "We did it." The ponies nicker softly, the moors glow under the stars, and somewhere, the world feels just a little bit brighter.